Hi there. Today I'd like to talk about the differences and similarities in SOPs, standard operating procedures, for identifying semen with the acid phosphatase presumptive test in various locations across the United States. So first, let's start by defining SOPs. Standard operating procedures dictate how we're supposed to do our tasks, how we're supposed to do our chemical tests, our reporting, our validations, everything under the sun. So what the EPA says is that SOPs detail the regularly recurring work processes that are to be conducted or followed within an organization. This means it can be a blanket term for any sort of regularly happening function. For our purposes today, we're going to be looking specifically at forensic laboratories and how they perform the acid phosphatase presumptive test, testing for the presence of semen. So let's talk a little bit about the goals of this research and what I was really trying to sort of identify. What I want to do is take SOPs from various locations across the United States and compare their language. Do they all align? Do they differ? Where do they differ? Sort of break down how the differences and similarities impact how forensic science testing is performed. You would think that the same piece of evidence, if tested in different locations, you would come up with the same result. But what I'm going about to tell you is that that's not always the case. And different reporting, different testing will change how we sort of view our results of our evidence. So let's talk a little bit about my sample size. I had 6 locations: New York City, New Jersey State Police, Colorado Bureau of Investigation, Washington, D.C., Department of Forensic Science, Palm Beach County, Florida Sheriff's Office, and Houston, Texas, DFS. So basically looking at those 6 locations and comparing their SOP, I found similarities, I found differences. So before we get into what my results were, let's talk a little bit about the acid phosphatase test and how that works. So the seminal acid phosphatase test, we can abbreviate that as SAP, is a presumptive test for the presence of semen. It's a fairly common task to be performed in these forensic labs, and this is because it's a very easy test to perform. As you can see in the top right, our product, what we're looking for is that purple color change or no color change on the left there. Um, so that's really what we're looking for. And let's talk about a little bit how we get to that color change part. What we're going to be doing is adding alpha naphthol phosphate to our evidence. It'll be a cutting, a swab, a filter paper swipe, something like that, in order to sort of separate our piece of evidence from our sample that we're going to be doing the presumptive testing on. We're going to add our alpha naphthol phosphate to it, and that will sort of cause this hydrolysis of the organic phosphate. This will then add our fast blue dye. This is a diazonium salt, and that will produce the color change that you see in the top right. Basically, the test is looking at the time it takes in order for that color change to work. The reason that we're looking at specific times is that not only is seminal acid phosphatase or acid phosphatase only in semen, it's also in other biological fluids. And this will cause the color change, although ideally on a slower rate than it would with our seminal fluid. And that's why we call it a presumptive test. There are other sort of substrates that will induce the color change, but this would be a good indicator for semen due to the high concentration of this enzyme in that location. So what I found in all the SOPs is that they sort of align in their structure. They all define the purpose, which is indicating potential presence of semen, all of that sort of legalese speak where they're making sure you know this is not a confirmatory test. This needs to be moved on to the confirmatory tests for things like confirming the presence of semen and also quantitation. We then have our safety disclaimer, basically what hazards are involved in this testing, and what PPE is the lab going to be providing in order to protect its employees. Then you have an equipment and materials section, what do you need to gather in order to perform this test. You then have the steps for performing the test and also validating your samples to make sure that they are performing properly. What I found was that every lab required that you have daily validations in order to, at the beginning of the day, you run something on a known positive and a known negative, and if you get the right results, Congratulations, you can now move on to your regular testing of your unknowns, your evidence. So let's talk a little bit about what was different in the SOPs. So of the 6 locations that I have below, I want to have a quick disclaimer about New York, because New York's SOP had been retired, is currently retired, and was only active through the beginning portion of 2018. The other SOPs I found are still active, to the best of my knowledge at least, and were active during 2018. So I thought that could be a nice point of comparison, as they were all active during that time, even if they're not active today. New Jersey State Police also did not have their SOP sort of listed, but did have a comprehensive guide on how they perform the testing, which had information that I could fill out in my chart below. While it did not have the exact chemicals and exact sort of setup that they use, I think it's still important to include that, even if the actual SOP wasn't accessible. Which brings me to my next point, is that not all locations in the United States have these sort of listed publicly, which I think is sort of a problem. I would definitely think transparency in forensic science is a good thing, and showing how all the testing is being done, even down to the minute steps, would be important. Especially for anybody trying to get into forensic science, then you can sort of see how the different testing is sort of done, and if you have any knowledge in that field, and sort of what to get trained in. In any case, let's talk specifically about the language differences in the SOPs. What I found was that the materials and the process of performing the acid phosphatase test was the same, whether they were getting the materials from outside vendors or creating it in-house. It was all the same compounds being mixed together for their acid phosphatase sort of mix that they were preparing. And that tells me that all of our procedure is the same. All of what we're doing to the sample is the same. And that should mean that our reporting guidelines should be the same, because we're being consistent with how we're performing our test, regardless of location. What I found was that is not the case. Depending on where you are, the reporting guidelines are very different. And let's take a sort of a closer look at that. As we can see with New York in their now retired SOP, they were requiring immediate color change once you add your reagent to your sample. You need immediate color change in order for that to be a positive result. They do not elaborate on what inconclusive and negative results would be, if they are different, if they're not. In any case, anything that wouldn't be immediate, I would assume would be a negative control, but or a negative result. In any case, they did not state that in their SOP. New Jersey, under 1 minute is considered positive. They also do not state what is inconclusive and negative. We have the same, not reporting the inconclusive and negative for Houston, Texas. What I think happened here is they really just wanted to focus on what would be moved forward to the confirmatory tests. But I do think, for sake of clarity and transparency, it is important to show what is an inconclusive result and what is a negative result. The other locations did speak on this. Colorado, under 2 minutes, positive result, and greater than 2 minutes would be a negative result. You have this sort of gray area where if you have uncertainty regarding the color change, that would be inconclusive. That would really be up to the technician. Washington, D.C., a little more stringent. Under 30 seconds is positive. 31 to 59 seconds, inconclusive. Greater than a minute, negative. So sort of, there's really no gray area in there. It's just sort of defined that way, and that's how you're going to be reporting it. Palm Beach County, under 3 minutes is a positive result. And if there's no color change after 3 minutes, that is a negative result. And if you have uncertainty, again, it falls into that inconclusive. They did have a sort of a disclaimer about the purple color change after 3 minutes could also be included as a positive, as long as it's interpreted with caution. Although I think, as you can see, sort of these other tests are keeping it to the 1 minute, 2 minute marks. 3 minutes seems a little excessive to me, and doing anything after that I think would just be sort of, it's not telling the full story. So anyway, we can see that these are all different. They're all sort of all over the board, and your same piece of evidence is being reported differently depending on where you are. I think that's really important to look at. I think that, say something is a minute 15, that is only getting reported as positive in Colorado and Palm Beach. The rest, it's being reported as either inconclusive or negative. And I think that's really important to understand how evidence will not be sort of further tested, will not be brought to the confirmatory stage. And in instances where this is our only piece of evidence, that could be a definitive change of the outcome for the case if it doesn't go on to further testing. So I think further directions for this would definitely be to look at more facilities, more SOPs across the country, whether that be calling to ask if they can be included in this research, whether that's just finding where they're hidden somewhere on the internet, and looking at private laboratories such as Bodhi Technology in order to sort of see how private labs also differ in their SOP procedure and what sort of things they're giving to the field. So again, we can also look at other types of SOPs, firearms, tool marks, chemical analysis. We can really do this for anything across the board, any field of forensic science, because at the end of the day, we have to determine whether the forensic science, the science is the important part, or if the law and following the procedure for our specific region is the important part. So I don't have the answer to that question, and I would certainly be interested into further developing this topic. Thank you for listening. Take care.